Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I apologize for the late start this morning, so I won't belabor the point, but I'm happy to welcome Rabbi Shuli Passow, who will be leading us this morning with our week in review of Daf Yomi. Rabbi Passow, thank you for being with us.
Great. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. I know we sometimes have folks from all over the globe joining in, and please feel free to, as some folks have already started to do, put your name and where you're zooming in from in the chat so we can get a sense of our learning community this morning. I'm really delighted to be back here with all of you. And I wanted to a couple of things this morning. As always, it's really hard to squeeze a week of Daf Yomi into 30 minutes or less, but we are going to attempt it. And what I'd like to do first is just talk a little bit about the flow of the past week before we even look at any particular passages. Because form and content, I think, are both very important when always, but particularly in Talmud study. And I want to point out that we started this past week on Daf Hey on page 5. That began with a continuation of the previous ideas that we had been discussing in the earlier pages regarding Purim, regarding what is a walled city, what is not a walled city, when do we read the Megillah on in a walled city or in a town, what's considered a large town. So we have a nice continuation there from where we were in the previous week. And then we start talking about other things related to Purim. What happens if there is a leap year, as there is this year? What happens? What are some of the mitzvot of Purim aside from Megillah reading, such as matanot le'evyonim, gifts to the poor, and mishloach manot, sending gifts of food to our friends. And then we have a pretty long digression over 2 dapim, more than 2.5 pages, about a pretty long digression where we get onto a series of mishnayot that are pretty short, perhaps some of the shortest mishnayot that we have, and for the most part, pretty short Gemaras explaining those mishnayot, those mishnas, and the reason why, and they have nothing to do with Purim, Megillat Esther, walled cities, anything that seems to be on topic. The reason why we get into this seeming digression is very much a matter of form and not content. And I will show you right here what I mean by that. I'm going to put a link in the chat to a Google Doc, which you should all have access to. So feel free to open it if you would, if you would like on your own computer. But I'm going to share it here as well. So this is a Mishnah on Vav Amud Bet. Short Mishnah, Karu et Megillah ba'adar harishon v'nit'abra hashana. If you read the Megillah during the first Adar and subsequently the year is declared to be a leap year, this Mishnah comes from the time before there was a set calendar where we knew that it was going in ahead of time, in advance, that it was going to be a leap year, and a second Adar month would be added. Korino Toba Adar Sheni. You read the Megillah again during the second Adar. Okay, so this opens up the question in the Mishnah's mind, and certainly then in the Gemara's mind, of what is the difference between the first Adar and the second Adar, and will the real Adar please stand up, right? Which Adar in a leap year is considered the Adar where we need to perform the mitzvot of Purim? We have a statement here in the Mishnah about reading the Megillah, which suggests that actually you have to read the Megillah in the second Adar, even if you already read it in the first. And now we get this legal construction, this idea, Ein bein Adar Harishon la Adar Hasheni, Ela kriyat ha-Megillah umatanot le'evyonim. The difference between the first Adar and the second Adar is only that the reading of the Megillah and distributing gifts to the poor are performed in the second Adar and not in the first Adar. So we're going to talk in a minute about what this actually means, but just to point out this construction, ein, bain, blank, le, blank, ella, the only difference between this and this is for some reason, a very intriguing construction to Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the redactor of the Mishnah, and the next several Mishnayot, 7, I think, as I said, seemingly have nothing to do with Purim, with Megillat Esther, with reading the Megillah, but they are all Mishnayot that contain this construction, this same construction of ein, bain, blank, le blank, ella. The only difference between something and something else is this. So we go on a pretty long tangent here to cover a whole range of topics, including the difference between certain types of high priests, the difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov, the difference between Shabbat and Yom Kippur, the difference between a whole variety of things. And as I said, the Mishnayot that are brought here are pretty short, and the commentary, the Gemara, the rabbinic discussion of those Mishnayot is also fairly short, which sort of suggests that they know they're on a tangent, and they want to get back to Megillat Esther. The rabbinic discussions that are discussed the longest are those where the content actually in some way relates back to what we've been talking about previously regarding walled cities, and when do we read the Megillah in walled cities, and what is considered a walled city. So there are a couple of places where the rabbis bring it back to something that's related to what we've been talking about previously, and then we get a little bit of a longer discussion. But for the most part, we have 2.5 pages, Mishnah, Gemara, Mishnah, Gemara, Mishnah, Gemara, on topics that have nothing to do with what we started off with. Then after that, we're going to go back to discussing the Megillah, talking some theological questions. As many of us know, the Megillat Esther does not contain the name of God. And the whole discussion opens up not so much about the presence of the name of God, but God's role in the writing of Megillat Esther, of the writing of the scroll of Esther. Was the scroll of Esther was the divine spirit at play? Was the divine spirit present in the writing of Megillat Esther? So that becomes a question that is looked at from a number of different angles. Different proofs are brought to try to understand why, in fact, that would be the case. The rabbis seem to very much want to prove that it was written with the divine spirit. That's why it makes sense for it to actually be in the Tanakh, to be in the canon. And then we can also understand that some of the other halachot, the other laws, the other principles that are discussed throughout this Masechet regarding the Megillah, whether the scroll has a certain degree of sanctity, whether we say brachot, blessings, over reading the Megillah, all of that is going to be related to the question of the divinity and the sacredness of this text. So that is discussed a little bit here. Then we move into another, I think, very, very interesting today and yesterday. If you read the My Jewish Learning daily dose of Talmud, both today and yesterday, the writers wrote about this phenomenon, this midrashic phenomenon, the biblical exegetical phenomenon of the petichta, which I think, as Sarah Ronas described in yesterday's page, it's like the rabbinic version of 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? Where the rabbis start with a verse, and then they find some connection to another pasuk, and then the connection to another pasuk, and another pasuk, and another pasuk, until they finally get to the topic at hand. So you start with a verse that seemingly has nothing to do with Megillat Esther, and it's almost like a game, right? Like an intellectual. They're proving their intellectual prowess. Again, remember, this is also a time where no one's sitting there with the Sefaria. No one is sitting there even with a printed Tanakh, right? This is all from memory. So the Petichtot is we don't see it all that much in the Gemara itself, but it is a midrashic form, and we have a series of Petichtot here related to Megillat Esther, and that's in the last couple of dapim from this week. And so we, getting a sense here of the flow of the week, what we see in the course of just 7 pages is a very wide range of the type of material, the type of rabbinic material that is brought, and the type of structures that we see in many places throughout the Gemara. So we have a mix of halacha, of actual legal statements about how you observe some of the mitzvot of Purim. You have theological questions. There's a bit of a digression, again, having not very much to do with Megillat Esther itself, but there is a theological discussion or a question on theodicy and why those who are wicked or evil might prosper. So we get into some questions of theology. We get into questions of or content of biblical exegesis, delving into some of the particulars of the phrasing in the psukim of Megillat Esther, in the verses. We have some narrative material. We have some digressions, as I spoke about earlier. So we really get a wide range in just 1 week of the content and also the types of structures, the types of form that we see throughout the Talmud. I want to take a quick, and I just see Laura wrote in the comment, this really helps explain the tangents. Thank you, I'm glad that it does. I will just also point out one additional thing that we see, I think it's maybe on page 5 or 6, which is another very common explanation for digressions in the Talmud. Sometimes we'll see that there's a statement of a particular rabbi that has to do with the topic that we've been talking about. And then because we've mentioned this person, we're going to start to bring all these other statements that he made, even if they have nothing to do with what we're talking about. So we see that here also. We see a tangent or a series of tangents based on statements of Rabbi Yitzchak, because we mentioned something about him in connection to our discussion about walled cities. And so then we're going to bring all sorts of other things that he said. So a lot of different ways to understand why the Gemara goes off on seemingly on a tangent. There is often some logic behind it. I want to look at a couple of, we have so little time, but I do want to look at a couple of pieces of text together. One, to go back to to go back to the question of Adar Aleph and Adar Bet, because we are going to have an Adar Bet this year, right? We're coming up in the calendar. We'll have an Adar Aleph and Adar Bet. And in fact, we will read the Megillah and perform all of the mitzvot of Purim. Matanot la'evyonim, gifts to the poor, mishloach manot, sending food gifts to friends, and the Seudah, the feast, the Purim feast. We will do all of those things in the second Adar, and that is comes from the basis for that is this Mishna that we just looked at a moment ago, that seems to suggest that the second Adar is most important, at least for these particular mitzvot of reading the Megillah and distributing gifts to the poor. But in the later halachic literature, Adar becomes the second Adar becomes the month that we celebrate or that we perform all of the mitzvot of Purim, not just these two. And it is in the second Adar that we read the special parshiot, the special Torah readings on 4 Shabbatot, before Purim and in between Purim and Pesach. But there is a very practical question that arises here. It's sort of kind of clear from this Mishnah, and then, as I said, from the Gemara, that and then the subsequent halachic literature, that Purim as the holiday is celebrated in Adar Bet. But does that mean that Adar Bet is the real Adar, right? Or is there some other reason why we are celebrating Purim in Adar Bet? And what could be the practical implication of this? It comes up very much regarding yard sites. If you have a yard site, if you are marking a yard site of a loved one who died in a non-leap year in Adar, do you mark that yard site in Adar Aleph or Adar Bet when it's a leap year? This is actually a very relevant question. It will be to some of us this coming Adar Aleph and Bet. So if we look at, and this is going to be the discussion that's in the Gemara here, is if we look at Adar Bet as the real Adar, and it's kind of Adar Aleph is the one that got added in as the extra Adar of the year to make it a leap year, then maybe everything should be celebrated or marked in Adar Bet, right? We're going to celebrate Purim in Adar Bet. We're going to mark yard sites in Adar Bet. If someone's having their bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, it's going to be in Adar Bet if they were born in the month of Adar, right? If Adar Bet is the real Adar, then we're just going to kind of put Adar Aleph to the side. But there is another reason that's brought in the Gemara for why Purim is celebrated in Adar Bet, and it has to do with the connection between Purim and Pesach. That we want the miracle of Purim to be close to the miracle of Pesach. We don't want to separate the celebration or the markings of those two significant miracles in our history. And if that's the case, then it makes plenty of sense for Purim to be celebrated in Adar Bet, but that doesn't really tell us anything about other things that we might be marking in the month of Adar. And so people, in fact, have different customs based on different customs in Ashkenazi, Sephardi, and Mizrahi communities. People have different family customs. Communities have different customs. So I don't want to, for anyone who's thinking about this, if this is a relevant question for you this year, I'm not going to say what you should do, but it is an interesting question that kind of, again, opens up existentially, what is this leap year? What is this extra month? And what is Adar Bet? And why is Purim celebrated there? So we have a real practical implication of that. I do want to look at one other text, just because it's fairly well known. A reminder that when rabbis say this text is fairly well known, they mean that 3 people know it. But it's a good one. It's a good story, and it's in our selection this week. Just quickly before we look at that, just to point out another very practical aspect of Hilchot Purim, of the laws of Purim, that we get from the Gemara on page 7 is how do we give Mishloach Manot and how do we give Matanot le'evyonim? So the verse in Esther says Mishloach Manot ish l're'ehu, sending portions one to another. So in a very close read, the Gemara says, or Rav Yosef says that brings a braita that says, it says two portions or multiple portions to one person. And this is where the halacha comes from that when we're sending Mishloach Manot to fulfill the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot, we have to send 2 types of food, meaning things that we would say 2 different brachot on, to at least 1 person. And that's based on this very close read of this verse here, that we are sending gifts one to the other. Matanot le'evyonim is described, uses the plural for both of these, for the receiver and for what is given. Gifts to the poor. So that means on Purim, we have to be sure to give multiple gifts, which could mean simply more than a certain amount of money, right? Would be considered more than $1, $2, $3, whatever. And it has to benefit at least 2 people. And so there are, many communities are very diligent about this and collect matanot le'evyonim that will be distributed on the day of Purim itself to multiple people, so that when you put your dollars in the basket, you know that you will be fulfilling the mitzvah in this way that the Gemara describes here. So that's just a little practicality that teaches us something about these mitzvot. And then I wanted just to look at this story. It's well known to many of us that there's an idea on Purim that you should become so drunk, so intoxicated that you can't tell the difference between good and evil, between Haman and Mordechai, right? So this is Rava's statement that a person is obligated to become intoxicated to the degree that it doesn't know how to distinguish between Arur Haman, cursed Haman, and Baruch Mordechai, blessed Mordechai. So Rabbah and Rabbi Zera, one year they had a Purim feast with one another, and they became intoxicated to the point that Rabbah arose and slaughtered Rabbi Zera. Okay, now there's going to be a lot of discussion in the commentaries about, did he really kill him? Maybe he squeezed him. Maybe it's not sechita or shechita, but it's sechita, which means he squeezed him, right? But it seems to be from the pshat, the simple reading of this story, that Rabbah killed his colleague, Rabbi Zera. The next day, he becomes sober and he realizes what he has done. Oh my God, I can't believe this. I got so drunk, I killed my friend. So he asks God for mercy and God revives him. And the next year, Rabbah says to him, let's go have another Purim feast together. That was really fun last year. And Rabbi Zera says, not so much. Miracles do not happen each and every hour, and I don't want to undergo that experience again. So this is a great, people talk about we have to get so drunk on Purim, and then this story is often brought to say, well, wait a second, we can't go that far. And clearly Rabbi Zera was a little bit apprehensive about what might happen if he went to have a Purim feast with his friend Rabbah again. Would God bring yet another miracle and revive him? So those are, in my opinion, at least some of the highlights from this week and the overview of this week. I'm just taking a look to see if there are any questions in the chat. Mary Jane says maybe that's why we don't celebrate Purim on both Adars, right? We don't want to increase our chances of getting too drunk that we might do something that we would regret and that would necessitate a miracle. We're basically at time, but since we started a couple of minutes late, I'm happy to go over by a couple of more minutes. And so if there's a question that someone wants to put in the chat or a comment, I'm happy to give that a little attention right now. Okay, Mary Jane. You are muted. I don't know, Ben, can we unmute?
Sure. Am I unmuted now?
You're good now. You're good now.
Okay. I was just thinking the way you did the overarching, we start with a discussion of the shiftiness of space and time. What's a wall? When was a city walled? How far from Shushan was somebody? What day do you read the Megillah, therefore? And then we go to Adar, which is also shifty time. So time and space are shifty and difficult to ascertain. What's not shifty is that you do read the Megillah and you do distribute gifts to the poor.
Right. Beautiful. Beautiful. So, and I think that's a really nice, perhaps message for where we are at this moment. Like everything seems to be shifting all around us. We don't know where we can be. Time seems to be a little weird. I feel like in this pandemic, we've been in and out of waves, and people don't know what day it is, what year it is. It feels a little bit like we're back there again, at least in New York right now. And you're reminding us, Mary Jane, that whatever is shifting all around us, the mitzvot remain the same. And there is some real beauty and anchoring in the constancy of the Jewish calendar in that way, which this passage reminds us of. So thank you everyone for being part of the learning this morning. This was so fun. I just want to invite people. I teach on Thursday afternoons. I see Mary Jane and some other folks are from my class are here. I'm going to actually put, let's see, do I have a second, Ben, to put that in the chat? Just if people want to register, welcome to join. We'll be meeting this afternoon, not next week, but Thursdays at 3:45 on Zoom. So I would be delighted if anyone would like to come and join the class. It's drop-in, so if you come one week and then miss another week, that's totally fine. And everyone is invited. So thank you for being part of the learning this morning. Have a wonderful day. And happy Purim, if I don't see you before Purim, which is a little while from now, but could be the case. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Take care. Thank you, Rabbi Shuli. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next time.